Hey everyone, it's Bob. Welcome back to the show. Today on Elevate Your AIQ, I sat down with my friend Brad Topliff, creative technologist whose nonlinear career path runs from early desktop publishing and user-centered design to a long stretch at the data company TIBCO, where he helped build a user experience practice around complex data products, and then on to other startup experiences at the intersection of people, product, and technology. We explore how to design technology that truly honors the human side of work, from self-awareness and trust to data ownership, identity, and the ethics of AI. We dig into Brad's current venture, SelfActual, brings positive psychology and imagination into how teams align and grow in this AI-powered era. It's an insightful, practical conversation about becoming human-ready, future of work. Let's go chat with Brad. Thanks for listening. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. I am your host, Bob Pulver, and with me today, I have the pleasure of speaking to my friend, Brad Topliff. How you doing today, Brad?
Doing great.
Excellent.
Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. Glad to have you. So, Brad, tell me, before we get into some of the meaty topics that are near and dear to both of us, and just a little bit of background, what you studied and what you've been doing so far in your career.
You know, I studied film, which which was not where I ended up, but it's funny because my career goes back to high school, where I grew up around Apple, and it went to high school where Wozniak and Jobs went to Apple. So we had computers back in the mid 80s and putting out a school paper, doing desktop publishing before it was a thing, not realizing, of course, that it was before it was a thing. And using software that we borrowed from various places as we did back then. And it's those skills that really took me through to where I am today. And one of those, so I was a graphic designer until art students started figuring out how to use computers. And then I realized I am not long for that world because I can copy lots of stuff, but I don't perhaps have the artistic vision to do that job. And then the same kept being true. Like I got into programming a little bit, but it wasn't going to be my thing. So I became kind of a translator of things, from the art to the engineers to leadership. And that has carried on through a bunch of things, including some startups that were always ahead of their time, right? Like when it doesn't work out, and like, oh, that was agentic technology before AI. Oh, that was that before. And then I worked at a data company, TIBCO, for 16 years. I go just back to the startup real quick. One of the things that I worked on was in distributed identity, which is one of the topics that is front of mind. I just left the Internet Identity Workshop, which has been running for 20 years, where people realized that there was no identity layer for the internet. And these are the luminaries in the field at the time as things were popping up, but all the idealism in the world couldn't stop the Googles and the Facebooks and their cool toys from keeping their own identity safe and realizing that it was so.
I definitely want to dig into that a little bit because I think it's very relevant, as I know it came up quite a bit, and you actually facilitated some sessions this week. And TIBCO, I remember I was at IBM when you were at TIBCO, but I remember that coming up as it relates to some of the things that IBM was doing and no longer does, related to like social software and things like that, right? Wasn't it?
TIBCO is a data company, and it was born when Oracle was born, and
Okay.
it was around when IBM was doing those things. But one of its biggest strengths was being neutral as far as technology goes. So it was about a bunch of really smart people doing messaging. It was the information bus company is what it was called. So data coming into a place and figuring out where it's supposed to go, and then as a company acquiring a bunch of stuff all over the place. So it was a large menu of things, and I came in to build a user experience practice, and not being a data person per se, we had to figure out how to, at the time, socialize the idea of user experience with engineers that love feature lists, and that teaching them slowly how important it was that the user voice was in the room and how it worked. And it was a slow process, like a product itself, to say, we would just do things that were very, very low effort for the engineers and the product managers to just learn from them, because we're building admin software for data moving around. Not Doesn't feel like the sexiest stuff in the world, but boy, it needed some work. So the the strides you can make are pretty high.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting when we talk a lot about AI and whether people are having success with AI at an enterprise level anyway, organizational level, that some of it goes back to those fundamentals, right? Like your data maturity, I guess, if I were to, sort of group all those things together, data quality, veracity of data, and, whether the data is trustworthy, and all those things are as relevant today, perhaps more so than ever. The Can you just share a little bit about what you're working on?
Well, when I left TIBCO and I was doing product strategy work, which is always intriguing to me, and everything to me is a product, I was introduced to somebody who had built over the last, say, 20 years from a dissertation in Africa around social communities. He had built methodology, and to some degree, there's a platform around it to help people with their self-awareness, strengths, and flow, what is about them, and then come back together with teams in a workshop environment to understand how your team's strengths work. And one of my first jobs out of college, again, back to Apple, I was working in the career center at Apple where we did MBTI, Myers-Briggs, and then that was intriguing to me. Plenty of books, and I had a library to go through this stuff. And then later, I had done DISC as TIBCO went into private equity, and Vista Private Equity actually had a great program, the High Potential Learning Program. And they focused a lot on that sort of the human side of things, what your strengths were. And so I was already interested in that. Everything I've done has always been human problems as I sort of look back and realize the common thread. And I said to a guy, it's called heliotrope imaginal, it's all imagination based. Heliotrope is following the sun, so it's positive psychology. And how do you help teams align in that way? And I said, who owns the data? He said, what? And I said, well, you're creating data about yourself. And this is, Myers-Briggs and DISC tend to be multiple choice questions, but this was more in-depth reflections. What do you think about those strengths? Strengths being thinking, feeling, planning, acting, and where they are relative to each other. So I said, you're creating a body of data about me and what I think about stuff. And who owns it? Is it you? Is it my organization who signed me up for this workshop? Is it, where does it lie? Because the authenticity of that data depends on how trustworthy, psychologically safe you feel sharing it. So if you're going to ask me, where do you want to be in 5, 10, 20 years? I may not want to share that with my organization, but it's important to my path, and which may be years in an organization. And I don't know what's going to happen, but a lot of people are probably like, oh, and I see myself not here. Right. But that may change. And there's lots of things there's a lot of inertia things that keep us in our jobs, but I don't want to be judged by my manager or leadership from what I say there. So we started just to close that up. I've created something called SelfActual, which takes that kind of human capabilities. And let's say you had also a skills framework and things that people do internally and want internally, and it creates data about me. And we're creating a way for people to own that and share it with their company. There's some things that your company gets sort of table stakes because they paid for it, but there's some things that you should be able to decide whether you want to share it back. So that's what we're building, with then the possibility of putting different tools like AI coaching or more tactical things of connecting people on top of that.
Wow, really, really intriguing. Because there's a couple threads there that I want to pull on. The first, just to sort of take a step back, you and I met years ago through Jason Averbook and Just Fun Bank's Now of Work community.
Great community.
Great community.
Love that community.
We were I guess I wasn't there at the very beginning. I think it started like during COVID, so I didn't start just that early. But you and I like sort of immediately found this sort of connection on a number of levels around some of these topics that not everyone thinks deeply enough about. I think we would probably agree on. But one of the things that I think we both appreciate about the community is the sort of human centric angle to transformation and to growth and things like that. It's really not. It almost never dives very deep into any kind of technical, discussion. So when we talk about things like, AI readiness, I guess I need to clarify for broader audiences that I'm really talking about human beings AI readiness, not like an organizational, oh, what's our infrastructure like? Or to my earlier point, how mature is our, data and analytics, foundation before we build AI on top of that. And, and so I feel like learning more about ourselves is really important. What are the, not necessarily like strengths and weaknesses or even personality, like you were talking about before, but what makes me tick? What gives me energy? What's the criteria that helps me get into that sort of flow state so I can be more effective, manage my own sort of attention time priorities, and then of course the third thread is around we talk about whether or not you should bring your whole self to work, right? And there's a compelling
Yep.
new book that's sitting behind me.
Don't bring your whole self to work.
Yeah, don't be yourself. Why authenticity is overrated and what to do instead. Thomas Jaburo Premier Music. He's been making the podcast round, so maybe we'll get him on the show. But yeah, it's really interesting to think about. It sounded good in theory, like, look, this is who I am, warts and all, but that's not necessarily realistic. People have their own, biases. They have their own relationships and style of collaborating and things like that. And sometimes the things you say in your personal life aren't the same things that you would say to be, effective and build relationships in a work, setting. And there's all kinds of other sort of nuances to that. So I'm very curious to dig into it. I heard him pitch on an NYU event with Professor Tavis, and I was intrigued, and I definitely wanted to dig into that. But I think one of the things that I think is interesting, tying that to what you're describing, is perhaps the ability to selectively sort of disclose, certain attributes about you or certain, I don't know, just certain elements. I mean, I'll let you sort of expound upon, some of the things that you specifically work on, but it just seems
I
like,
remember the first time
yeah,
someone said that, and it reminded me, and I can't remember the exact stat, but it's something like upwards of more than 60% of people mask at work, right? And then you think about bringing your whole self, and at home you're the king of the castle or the queen of the castle, or you've got kids, you're a leader. You are a leader. So when people talk about leadership in a company, I think some people just go, well, I'm an individual contributor, I'm not a leader. But the fact is that somewhere in your brain, you are leading people. So the things they can teach you about that are useful. But you go into work and, I don't mean to, but I tend to pick on purchasing for no good reason, but you're in purchasing, right? And there's a reason why, because a lot of purchasing's goal is to say no to stuff, right? Or legal, or, you can pick one, but you come into those places, and the, the change happens somewhere between the time you left home and the time you got to work. And some people are very, very open with themselves, and other people are like, I'm at work, I'm just trying to get this done so that I get a paycheck or get my health care. I do this and go home to my family. And I don't want to think about that stuff at home. So your brain is shifting back and forth, but you probably don't think about it that much. The mindfulness of doing it, to pick a term. I don't think that is the general commonality, right? But and that said, there's lots of different kinds of people in an organization think about things differently, and then user experience, we use personas. Usually, hopefully research based, that talk about what kinds of people are in an organization. And they're going to be on a spectrum, of course, from the depending on what generation you're from, how open you are, maybe, as a symptom, as opposed to the cause, where your politics lie, where your parent, like all of that stuff fits into this. Where if you told people, let's be mindful, to use a word I just used, or, what would be really useful is meditation, they're going to shut down, right? And we don't have to teach them to not do that. They like what they like, right? Empathy is hard for some people. Yet they also are in the workplace, and you can't give people 7 things empathetic people do and expect some change. So what we can do instead is talk about talk about not what we are, which is what a Myers-Briggs or a DISC does. It tends to feel static, and it tends to go, oh, this is really interesting, I'm gonna learn about this, and then go. But how can we, using some positive psychology, some image training, some, all of these things that are not there to point out gaps, but rather how do we do what we need to do as a team with what we have, right? And that might mean my planning skills are low. You need to be around, I would say quieter rather than low, actually. Tend to think of it as relative to each other. So my feeling might be up here, but my planning might be, somewhat quieter for me, if I sort of understood, and my team is okay with that, right? They're not like, oh, can't believe you can't do that. But that means a, project manager around, or someone who actually thrives on hitting deadlines and managing stuff, useful balance on a team. So as companies put teams together, you do want to know where people are, and skills are, but accept that they're dynamic individuals, right? Like somewhere between the word imagination and the soul are the things that the Jungian things like 16 personalities or Myers-Briggs, they don't talk about. They just say, I'm an ENFP. Oh, I did that in the 90s, but still holds. I don't remember the nuance between how far I can feel it in me, and it changes from extrovert to introvert, which are, not even what Jung meant by those terms, but we just get locked in.
Yeah. I was thinking about like I guess to your point, like what assessments or what attributes like do have some level of permanence such that you could put them in like, I don't know, I guess when I think about like digital credentials, right? Like you're sort of putting them in this like digital locker of some sort, and you're giving, I think about it like, do you have a smart like garage door opener in your house? So, you can set different codes. Like you can set a code, the one-time use code, or this can only be used like 5 times because someone's watching your house every day just for a week, and then that's it. So there's different ways, and like so you want to basically selectively give people access. So maybe it's access for a certain period of time, like you're an active job candidate, and anyone who wants to interview you can access that during that time period, or it's listen, this is these are the steps, and this is the expectations as you go through our recruiting process. I'm just using talent acquisition as an example, but we're going to give you, your first step is going to be a psychometric assessment, and then you're going to do this technical assessment, and then you're going to do whatever. It's just like, well, wait a minute, like how many times, like I'm interviewing a lot, right? So maybe you're using one of these tools where you apply to all these jobs and you're a rock star, so you're getting all these interviews. Like, am I actually going to have to take this assessment, the same assessment, 100 times for 100 interviews, or can I take it once and then just let me know? I'll gladly share the results with you, because that's what I'll just give a shout out to Plum, for example. Like Plum, you you own that, and you can share it with whoever. You can share those results with whatever party, third party needs access to that information. But don't waste, thinking about like whether it's employee experience or candidate experience, don't ask for information that is already available. But it does go back to your earlier point that, maybe there are some things that are fluid and need to change and need to be perhaps, updated and fed into that those digital credentials, or some just have this permanence that it's like, let me take this once. My personality is not going to change in the next 6 months, I promise. And here you go.
My dad used to say a job interview is two people sitting across the desk from each other lying, right? So on the one hand, you got the job that's telling you the job doesn't turn out to be the job. And on the other side, you're trying to be the person who fits that job or whatever the thing is, right? And, I always laughed when I say that, but it's it's not it's not well, I wouldn't say lying. I would say that in the current state of the world.
Remember that feeling the first day of school, looking for your table in the cafeteria? Do you know anybody? Where are you supposed to sit? You don't know, but you definitely feel like there's toilet paper on the bottom of your shoe. Ugh, this is the worst. Well, you know what they say, high school never ends. I'm Anna Morgan, former corporate recruiter turned entrepreneur, and I know the workforce can feel just as complicated and clicky as high school. Trust me, I've been there. The layoffs, the imposter syndrome, the what the hell am I doing moments at 3 a.m. It all brought one point into focus. We all deserve a place to belong and learn. So I started this podcast just for us. Welcome to your Career BFF podcast, a place where everyone has a seat at the table, complete with masterclasses, no BS advice, and candid conversations with some of my favorite people. It's the Breakfast Club meets the boardroom. So whether you're the rebel challenging the status quo, the brain strategizing your next move, or the quiet wizard making magic behind the scenes, you have a seat. So grab your backpack, find your spot, and get ready to learn, laugh, and lead together. Because in this classroom, everyone's got a BFF. Class starts soon. See you there. Bye.
HR often doesn't know how to write a job description properly for a department that they're not in, and the manager doesn't know how to do it. So they're sort of like pointing fingers to go do that. And they're still putting things in there that are not 100% necessary. Like, you need 15 years of experience in HR. Wait, aren't you trying to change things in your HR department? Isn't that I'm not saying you should hire all IT people to go into HR, but there is some difference of thinking that people understand and they're not really prepared to act on. The other thing that comes to mind is the README that some organizations do, which is where it might just be a wiki page and you're deciding, well, I'm going to put in my Myers-Briggs here. I'm going to put in that when I'm not here, I like to sunsets and how I walk with my dog and do jigsaw puzzles and all of that. And then here's the best time to reach me. And, there's all of that stuff that doesn't necessarily change from job to job that could be in a digital self vault, if you will, that allows you to go, oh, these things are things that I want, even a new company where I'm interested, or let's stick with internal mobility to avoid the part where an organization is paying for something and you go look for another job based on them, because internal mobility is the same issue, right? Oh, I'm in finance, but I've always been interested in HR. I don't want to tell my manager that. I don't know who exactly to tell. And HR isn't announcing all these job openings that are coming that might, but AI actually can, with discretion, help connect those people and say, oh, you should go talk to Bob, right? And might not even tell you why, but it says, maybe it's got your agenda and Bob, it's contacting you and saying, here's what would be interesting for you, but let the humans figure out what they need to talk about rather than having something like an AI or automation force it on people and to force the interpretation on something that doesn't have empathy, curiosity, creativity, like any of those the human capabilities. And that's what we learned. So I think that the other thing about distributed identity that has been true for the last 20 years, right? At least in the ideal, like I said, I went to this conference, wonderful people, some the same from 20 years ago, some new people going, oh, this is really interesting to me. But verifiable credentials are a big part of it, right? If you can own your own identity and you can control the data to some degree, even in an organization, people want to know, is that skill you're talking about a first person or third person reporting of a skill? And that means, and that doesn't mean let's take a poll and say, does everybody else think Brad has this skill? But, I could say I'm a really good writer and someone else could go, right? But that if you were doing assessments, which there are, a million assessments of various kinds, then you could have a verifiable verified sort of stamp of, yeah, this guy took a Myers-Briggs. Like we can all agree that that was the score he got, and don't make him take another one. It's not proctored, right? There's a certain amount of trust that you can get, but you don't want to think about all those things. You want it to be in the outside or internal mobility world. This vault of yours might be your resume, and like not looking at an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper to figure out what bullet points are best, but put everything in there, right? Everything you did, and after a while, it would be a perpetuating set of data that said, I don't want to go for a job and think, now, what did I do there that was valuable to somebody, increased by 20%? That can actually be collective data if the company can say, yep, that guy worked on that team, and we know that that team did something great, without giving away company IP. It just seems like something that it's useful for talent acquisition and well-being, just mental health, is that your organization trusts you enough to do these things.
Yeah, I mean, you're hitting on a lot of important points. I do think one of the things that, again, going back to sort of your personal profile and you as a job candidate, and frankly, I use job candidate in the broadest sense, right? Whether you're active or passive, if you're open to an opportunity, if it presented itself to you, then you're by default a candidate. Just like if you have any positive reception to any advertisement at all, you're a potential, customer or consumer.
Sure. And you're on LinkedIn, and people see what you're writing, and they see what you've done before, and they're like, recruiter reaches out to you. It's already there. It's just LinkedIn. So it's owned by Microsoft and has its own agenda.
So if I were to pick on the existence of the resume, as I often do, it's like, back in the day, I used to go and literally pick out like the paper, the color and the thickness and the texture of the paper that I'm going to print my hard copies of my resume on over at Kinko's, and then selectively send them out or whatever. And now I get it from a competitive standpoint, from a relevance standpoint, and when you've been working for over 30 years, it's hard to condense that into a 1, 2, or even 3-page resume oftentimes. But the fact that we're all customizing resumes, and yet we have a single LinkedIn profile. Like, I don't update my LinkedIn profile very often. You want to know what I did? Here's what I did. Now, not everyone uses it in the same way. Some people, you go and it just has their titles and the time, frame that they were, in that role, and they give you no detail whatsoever. You're obviously not an active, job candidate if that's the case. But my point is, like, you have one LinkedIn
Or not
profile, right? You have one LinkedIn profile. Anyone can go and see that. And if you want people to be drawn to you for personal branding, reasons, or so that sourcing tools and human sourcers can reach out to you without you having to deliberately, notice a good job and then apply to it. It just seems like, there's, I don't know if it relates to, it doesn't really relate to bringing your whole self, but if you customize a resume and you say, I'm only going to share these particular bullets in these particular roles, you're already not showing the complete you. And then tying that to what you were describing as far as like, people in one group, maybe not getting exposed to opportunities in another area, whatever. If you don't know the sort of lineage and all the the winding path that your career has taken, and all the hats and roles and companies that you've been with, and there's no way what that person is capable of doing. You would have a tendency to just say, here's this person, he's in this department, he's got this title, what does he possibly know about this other domain? And when you have a portfolio career, or your career has been more lattice than ladder, then you've done a lot of things. I mean, I'm biased in this direction because I have had that sort of very, this roller coaster of a kind of path. So you wouldn't know, like, the space that I generally, play in now around, like, talent transformation, talent technology, HR tech or whatever, you wouldn't know that I didn't spend the first 26 years of my career in that space at all. So you wouldn't
Sure.
know
Right.
unless you
And,
asked
and,
or
and something new like AI comes back and you become, you know, expert in the, the AIQ, the ethical use of AI. Like that wasn't a thing for you. Well, it was a thing for you at IBM, I suppose. There was some of that because, that's what's embedded. But broadly skilled people, if, listening to Now of Work, right? These experts in the field recognize that broadly skilled people are way better than all specialized people. Job descriptions are specialized. They don't go seeking, generally speaking, broad skill. Oh, we're looking for somebody that's a Swiss Army knife stuff. And they're looking for a scalpel and they never get a scalpel. But how do you, and you're constantly, oh, what is this job description? How should I reorder this stuff so that what they read first is, I was a product manager for 5 years or 20 years, depending on how you define that. If you think everything's a product, you're like, yeah, I've been doing that forever. User experience. That was the part that I was hired in to do for TIBCO. And I ended up working in innovation and collaboration and working for the COO and finding places that you could go, like, oh, these people aren't talking to these people for some reason in this organization. Let's just go set up a meeting with them and, and not facilitate a workshop, but rather just facilitate the relationship with them. But that's not how the current system works. It would be, for me, it would be obviously better if it did. And I want people to know, fine, I spent time in high school doing desktop publishing. That's in there somewhere, right? It's clear layouts, like all that stuff. But I'm not putting my school paper on up top on my resume, nor are they going to read that far down because people don't read things this day. So where can AI, for example, with the discretion that it has or the understanding and pattern matching, oh, well, let's really dig into exactly what you're looking for over here. And over here, we can understand a little bit more of what you are and where those things match and try to connect beyond, keyword searches of ATS systems today. You can get more of the capabilities of a person, especially when you add in not only the strengths and the flow, but the skills and how they think about those things. I knew a guy who was, when we were talking about the sort of strengths and skill stuff, he said, it's incredible. I've worked with this woman for 9 years and I always had her doing the spreadsheets and she did it really super well. And then we did this thing and found out she hates them. She doesn't like doing spreadsheets at all. She just happens that she can do it. And it would be a bullet point on her thing that says really good at this thing. But, she doesn't like it at all. He's like, wow, he was a manager. I felt like such a jerk. Right. So there's those certain things that you want people to know. And then you get into, even deeper pieces like neurodiversity, where you are on a spectrum of ADHD or autism or dyslexia or whatever, that a lot of those have negatives and positives. And in the positive world, you have certain ways that you've dealt with that if you had a diagnosis or not. But again, there's a thing you don't want to go telling your manager. You're not putting on your resume, but wow, super, super interesting to know. And I'm not even talking about diagnosis. I'm talking about like how your brain works on stuff is interesting and not articulatable for the common person. I think of that Steve in purchasing over somebody who is mindful and thinking about this stuff all the time. And if we can build something, so 95% of people think they're self-aware. And the stat is that only 12%. There's a book by Tasha Eurich called Insight 2016. And she talked about people who became self-aware after not being self-aware. She calls them the unicorns because that's who you can learn from. And self-awareness is understanding yourself to some degree, understanding how other people perceive you to some degree, and understanding where you fit in the world. Those were her three. Most people are just in I think about myself a lot, therefore I am self-aware. which ends up being rumination. It ends up being, all of the negative impacts or the biases you have against yourself become this thing. And that's, and it's not the truth. So if we can, using the tools of today, AI, whether it's assessments or talking to people or whatever, we can help people plant a seed of self-awareness, just a seed of it. And then, especially if you're doing something with your team, which people will behave differently at work for their team than they would if you handed them an AI coach and said, hey, here's your onboarding thing. Tell us all about yourself. And they're like, I don't know if I want to do that. So if instead we can plant the seed of that and have them understand where, even understanding your imagination, which is part of this, right? Your imagination's always on. It affects everything you do. Anxiety is part imagination in the same way that creativity is imagination. It just depends on what you grab hold of and hyper focus on. So if you can plant a seed of that as well, then people go, oh, this is valuable. I can do this. I can have the psychological safety to be me. And I don't have to think about the company implications of that or whatever. This is just me. This is how I work.
I mean, just going back to your point where, like, the leader didn't even realize that, or just didn't think deeply enough that the assignment that he's giving to some person just because they're good at it doesn't mean they like to do it, right? And so I think everyone ideally would be in the center of their sort of Venn diagram, right? That says, the intersection of the things I'm good at, the things I like to do, the things that somebody needs it done, I guess, is the third one. But if you can find that sweet spot in the middle, that's ideal. And again, going back to what I was talking about before, like if you don't know what someone has done before, and to add to that, if you haven't taken the time to really understand what makes someone tick, whether that's just through a human to human conversation or something that's, insights that are drawn out from one of these assessments or whatever it is, then you're you're not going to be as effective of a leader, because you're overlooking one aspect of the relationship and the trust that needs to be established, but the other is you're not getting the best out of your team, which means they're not achieving their potential. And if your team isn't achieving their potential, then that eats away at your own sort of leadership ability to a degree.
Right. And the way that you put that suggests a static team, which is not true either, right? Cross-functional teams, you go, oh, these are the teams we're in purchasing that this, every day we do this person does that, and all of that. But then, hey, we want you to be on this cross-functional team, or, tiger teams it's still a thing in a lot of organizations. I have an engineering manager friend with, let's say, 60 people under him somewhere. And it comes to him to decide how to put a team together, but he knows he needs a front end guy, he needs a database guy, he needs a this, he needs a that. And he knows who's, at what scale they are from a skills perspective. But there's no way for him to have insight into all of those 60 people and know this would be an ideal team for the thing you're trying to do based on strengths, based on, information that they've given, or, however it comes in, kudos, rewards and recognition, like all of these things are packaged up into something and nobody can really parse them all. But if, this guy's trying to build a team, that data exists in the system and could say, and then not what we're doing, but what other people do. It knows that, Brenda's going out on maternity leave, not a great choice for that team at that time, right? So how can you say, well, this is what we expect out of this project, and have AI should help, if it could, and I'm not even saying it can, know people to some degree, right? Know how they want to be perceived in a place, that, which skills they want to show up at work with, aren't necessarily their jigsaw puzzle skills or their cooking skills, but those are interesting and important to them either. It's just really hard for humans to figure out which thing to focus on.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is at companies who are trying to do better around like internal mobility. right? So to your point earlier, like you may not want to share certain information with your immediate boss, or maybe you don't want to share it with a future boss or whatever. But the fact is, if there's opportunities that are presented themselves in like an internal like talent marketplace, whether that's I mean, it could be like a project, like a sort of extracurricular project, but it could very well be like a potential next assignment, right? A next full time assignment. And so already you have friction where, the manager is trying to keep some stability on the team, and they've got metrics to make and deliverables to execute against. And so, their selfish reaction would be like, where do you think you're going? Right. But at the same time, if you,
Right, I don't want to lose my good
yeah,
people, and that's corporate citizenship and all of that.
yeah, what's best for your employee? Are you helping them achieve their potential? And is this the best thing for the organization? If you know enough about their interests and their abilities and their commitment to the organization and whatever, then hopefully you realize that, you know, that, that everyone's got to sort of evolve and be on their own path, and hopefully you can find, some sort of happy, you know, medium to do that. But sometimes you've got to potentially reveal, some of the things that you're good at, that you're interested in, knowing that, I don't know, I guess it depends on the culture of the organization, like whether or not that's going to be, a fruitful,
Right. Well,
switch.
let's take the stakes down a little bit
Okay.
from the binary: have a job, have this job versus have a different job. Imagine a world in which your company promoted the idea, and like Google had whatever their 20% of time in sort of innovation land. But what if it was 20% of your time was volunteer land, branching out land, not necessarily the thing you do outside of work where you're, doing food banks and stuff, but rather, hey, I have this project over here and I'd like to be in this volunteer, pool because you get bonused, or some part of your job is to branch out. Now you've got people with those skill sets that aren't looking to move departments, but definitely could use a little bit of different kind of work. And guess what? Now they're learning about a different area of the company, which is great for the company, right? The person in finance, person in legal that goes, oh, I'm going to go over and help.
Hi, I'm Carmen Hudson. I'm the host of the Recruiting Book Club, and we're starting our second season. I'm so excited to bring to you another set of guests of recruiters who have written books. We are excited to have some very special guests this season. We've got Shally, we've got Craig Fisher, James Ellis, and quite a few other people that we're going to bring on board to tell us about what they wrote, why they wrote it, and maybe we'll veer off into a conversation about recruiting on all types of topics and subjects that happen in our industry. So I hope you can join us. I'm excited.
Them do this thing without having to go through the process of, gotta go ask my boss, I have to go do this. Give people autonomy in some things that they're doing, and their well-being improves. And and they like their company better. They like one thing that I don't want to say most people, I don't think that would be fair, but the feeling that you get, Seligman, who is the father of positive psychology, talks about this, about happiness and what it means and how much that can be affected by helping someone do something, right? Like you get the endorphin rush, you get all this stuff from just like, oh, I did someone a favor. I helped the lady across the street. I helped with groceries. I did something that I didn't have to do, didn't get anything out of it necessarily, but that's a company culture. Like that's something that your company in their values could say, yeah, we want people to go do these things. Now, if you're on a tight schedule and something, they might say, now is not the moment for you to be jumping over and focusing on something else. Or they might say, wow, we need you to get this thing done, but we also need to give your brain a break and let you go over and help solve a different problem in a different way, because solving a different problem in a different way helps across the board. Like the specialization stuff is seems to be dwindling among people that talk about it. Whether it is in action, it's really hard to say inside organizations.
I know we need to wrap up, Brad. We could probably talk for at least another hour.
Already? How long has it already been that long?
It's, well, I know you got other stuff you got to work on. But I think one of the things, I mean, certainly on this show, I talk to my guests all the time about, how important human centricity is in this, AI age, however you want to sort of frame that. But I guess one thing I wanted to sort of tie together with some of these, important like human elements, knowing more about yourself, knowing how that can best be sort of presented to others, whether it's inside your organization or to a future organization or whatever. Like how how do you think about like navigating all of that on top of, this sort of continued and seemingly accelerating, growth about, AI in the workplace and how that is causing, sort of more anxiety with people. I guess I just wanted to like sort of unpack that a little bit because in some ways I think there are going to be limitations to what AI can do, and it's going to make these human sort of durable skills that much more attractive. But we also can't ignore the fact that some of the non-human, what we used to call soft skills, are now sort of related to how you can augment your own skills and abilities, with the technology. So I guess just like I know that's sort of a big question,
Let me
but
see if I can navigate it a
yeah,
little bit. I
yeah,
mean, one of the things that, pops into my mind is that even though I think about this stuff a lot and you may think about this stuff a lot, most people don't think about this stuff a lot. So teaching people something in an active way rather than in a lecture situation that says, all soft skills. Communication requires empathy, which requires self-awareness, right? Like you have to understand kind of what you are like to be able to communicate to somebody and make sure that it is helping them too. You have to be able to step into somebody else's shoes to have some of those things. Like, well, at least it's very helpful. So finding the sort of practical ways to reach them is one thing, right? And AI is just appearing all over the place in people's jobs. One of the things about the fear of AI or the confusion about AI, like how many people are sitting at a computer and also say, I'm not a computer person, right? So how can you show those people in a safe way, not safe for the company, but also psychologically safe for them, that where AI can help reframe things for them rather than teach them prompt and engineering, right? I don't think my team, respects my contribution. Well, that's your framing. How can we let AI help you reframe that also without peering eyes of, let's say, your manager? Like when you start to type something into that AI, the chat, whatever the platform is that your company gave you, you're like, well, who can see this? Even internally, they're like, oh, don't worry, it's safe. It's all inside the company. It's coming from inside the house, right? And so prompt engineering is important, but also understanding for those people who never think about it and don't want to use it, that is useful for them bringing their enduring human capabilities together with this thing that does something, right? But in addition to that, if you're plugging in lots of information, and in addition to the people and how they, their strengths and their flow and all that, you've got company values, you've got, strategy. Strategy is a really big one. I think, it's in the 90% of people don't understand company strategy. And guess what they're not doing? Asking their manager over and over and over again, where does this work I'm doing fit into the company strategy? How is it that me doing this spreadsheet or whatever it is fits the company strategy? But, and they're embarrassed to be asking that every day because they don't think about work all the time. It's not continuous thread of how you think about work. But you should be able to go in somewhere and say, hey, my AI companion or whatever it is, I'm doing this thing. How does it fit into company strategy? Or even with leaders who want to nudge company strategy in a different direction, mostly they have, hey, everybody, we're pivoting, right? Which is such a binary thing. But if the leaders were in here, putting into this system and AI had the discretion to say, hey, here's an area where we might nudge some people towards this direction so that we don't have to make them think that we're all, you know, bozos throwing darts at a board in the C-suite. That that you don't have to make a broad binary announcement of hey everybody, we're going to change our culture now. How can you do that for people on an individual level in the language that they are prepared to hear, and not scare the crap out of them that just stuff changes all the time, and because as soon as people, I told you about this a long time ago, work equilibrium is where what everybody wants, this steady state between I like my job. My job is fine and I love my job. But when they go down into this place is run by bozos, why am I here? Then that's where the quiet quitting or the actual quitting happens. So your goal is to help them remain in here, float them up when they need it. But that doesn't mean they're going to get to I love my job. Not everybody does. So if you say, oh, here's how we can have something that is helping them to assuage fears, and not, you do something and there's no communication and everyone's just like, I feel a layoff coming, right? But that's not actually what's happening somewhere. And while it's not going to say, don't worry, there's no acquisition because there's certain things you can't reveal, there are certain things that you could communicate gently to people and prep in a way, based on themselves. And now we have the computing power and the AI power, and it's only beginning to do that. If we can only make sure not humans aren't in the loop, but humans are first, because you see all this failure of AI. That's because people are trying to get AI to do it all, and having worked in automation forever, it just doesn't work. It's rules based. Things change, like chaos theory. Life finds a way. Jurassic Park,
Right
there in that documentary.
right. Yeah, I mean, you got me thinking about how much you could share. Like, let's say you do use the sanctioned, AI tools, and maybe maybe some of them are custom built, right? Like, who owns and has access to that data as well, right?
You
Because
say sanctions?
sanctioned, like the approved,
Sanctions.
Oh. Tools, like CIO says,
Right.
yes, you can use ChatGPT, but not Gemini or whatever, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
Now, in the consumer space, like if I'm using someone, let's say I build a custom GPT and I put it out in the public catalog, so anyone with a paid ChatGPT account can access it. Well, technically, OpenAI says they can't see your prompts, they can't see your data, right? All they can see is what users have access. Well, there's also, I think, a pretty straightforward workaround to that, which is you use an API, and the API connects to another system, and that system is collecting that data. What's the difference? Somebody just collected the data and now has access to it, right? So I actually don't know, since I'm not in an organization at the moment, like I don't know what happens when they build their own stuff and who has access to the data, but I'd like to know that.
Yeah, and there's trust, as my co-founder says. In the presence of trust, you don't need security. That's a big thing to say in data, but there's always going to be bad actors, and who are you letting into the tent? Is OpenAI a good actor or a bad actor? Is Claude and Anthropic good or bad? There's no way of knowing, and then things get bought and like data switches around. But it's I think that you want to protect both the organization and the individuals separately, because that organization, they're, do you trust everybody in HR? If that information is out and they're like at the water cooler talking about it, like that, they talk about that in HR where there's all kinds of leaky stuff going on. But so can you do calculations on encrypted data? Yeah, that's a growing area of interest, of not unencrypting things, but being able to use it without seeing it.
Yeah, no, I mean, they've been doing that I remember there were projects at IBM doing that a long time ago. You could basically you can match on a one-way hash algorithm and in cybersecurity and stuff like that. And so you wouldn't have to reveal, you can obfuscate, all kinds of personally identifiable, fields and stuff like that. So Yeah, I mean, I think trust underpins everything these days, and I think the trust bar has been raised for these solution providers, whether they're AI native and foundation platforms.
Trust is a tough word. It's, alongside of imagination and innovation. What exactly are we talking about when we talk about trust? And for me, I don't have the answers to all of this stuff. Thought about it a bunch. We have a startup around it, and if we can convince investors that this is a great problem to solve, we can get there. But for me, it's not important because we can start with the humans and we can start small over here with small seeds of just people interacting with each other before we even got to the data. You do a workshop, you get a report at the end, and you're like, that can be it. But if you want to add, an AI thing to it, is it outside the company? Is it inside the company? Because I don't want to give any IP of the company outside, and it's not IP of me to how I do my job. It's about me. And I don't think you'd run into any human that would say, no, the organization should own that. Right.
Yeah.
But they need a place to know how to do it. People don't know. They don't know that their data that they could own their data. They think that cow has, the virtual cow has left the server barn. And they're like, oh, it's all out there anyway, right? But younger people aren't thinking that way necessarily either. So how do we, can we give them a place where you're like, yeah, you can put something over here and it is, and it is safe, but don't put in there where the bodies are buried because we're not ready. We're not ready for that. We're not ready to accept that trust yet.
Yeah.
I don't want to know your deepest, darkest secret. It's
Right.
Bob.
Yeah. No, you don't.
Right. You don't want to be TMIing with AI.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's really important in a work setting. It's important with, this, AI companion, concept. It's important with a any kind of digital twin and who's going to have access to that.
And I will say the digital twin thing is always kind of bugs me because it sounds creepy. And I think that the regular everyday people are going to be like, I don't want that. But because is it there, what is this twin for? Is it, what they should be, and most of the companies I've seen doing it are not saying we do this for the individuals. We're here to use this for the sake of the individual. Always ends up in the corporation going, oh yeah, we want to have a digital twin of Bob. And is that because we want to know tactically how his job did or how his brain works? Because Bob does his job in this way because his brain works in this way. And that's different than a different person coming in and they would take that same job and do it differently. And AI can't be how Bob's brain works. It doesn't work that way because you're also thinking about, oh, I know that other team over there is gonna, this will make things harder for them. So I'm gonna, I know that because of my broad history and all of this memory that you can't possibly put into any kind of system that AI could take advantage of.
Yeah.
Our human brains are still better.
For a lot of reasons. Actually, Ray Dalio just wrote a really interesting post about this, about his own creation of his own. I brought it up with another guest just the other day, but he has always, do you know Ray Dalio? He built Bridgewater. And so it was kind of controversial the way he operated, Bridgewater back in the day, but I read his book Principles and I thought it was fascinating. And so he just sees his own digital twin as what he's always sort of envisioned about where that kind of concept goes. Like, do you understand how I make decisions, how I connect dots, how I merge? This isn't just about your digital twin. Let's capture Bob's, institutional knowledge and the tacit knowledge or whatever. It's about what he considers based on all, especially sort of mixing what Ray described and my own experience as a sort of lifelong like generalist, right? But because I've been in all of these domains, because I understand how all of these different parts of an organization actually are interconnected and affect each other, there's a certain way in which the decision-making process is made. And then you combine that, not necessarily with a digital twin to be used individually so that you can basically scale your advisory practice in one sense. But how could you then take the digital twin of multiple people who have the cognitive diversity, that would be pulled together ideally for any big decision, how could you then potentially employ the digital twins of all of those people so that you have a digital twin of the collective intelligence of a specific group?
So one, I think the term digital twin will die, and I hope it does. But imagination and that piece of it, that core piece, is not something that AI can do, and it can, it's a tree falling in a forest and no one hearing it. If AI is not telling someone something, then it isn't. They might look at something. My AI chatbot or whatever might look at something and say, check out, I've made these connections. Here's an idea. And I'm like, oh, that's very imaginative, but it wasn't imaginative. It was, what's the next letter to write to make this? But it did inspire me to recognize that idea and go, when people are embarrassed by using AI, that's not the right attitude either. You're like, oh, I did it, but I did it with ChatGPT or whatever. Yeah, you shouldn't be plagiarizing. You don't want the beige results to come out, but it can go, here's the black hat, green hat, yellow hat of that idea. And if people get used to that instead of, that's a great idea, Bob. And let me tell you why this business model works and will make $1 billion, that's dangerous. But if you can get people to understand and have them go, no, I want to hear the negative part of the idea and where it won't work, then you're talking about the 6 hats of Doha, whatever the 6 hats come from. But that's something
Isn't that from a Dr. Seuss book?
AI should be doing. What's that?
Isn't that from a Dr. Seuss book?
6 hats? No, that was the 1,000 hats.
Oh, 1,000 hats of Bartholomew Cubbins or something.
Correct. Yeah. Cubbins, that's it, right? No, this is the 6 hats of whatever. Yeah. Google 6 hats.
I'll find it.
You'll find it. and then tell your ChatGPT to do that, at least with 3 of them, so that you're getting why it won't work, why it would work, and then the hybrid between them for connecting, like, oh, why don't we try this? That's that's where the ideas happen.
Yeah. All right, Brad, we're going to put a pin in it.
Yep.
I really, really appreciate you spending so much time with me. It's a really interesting discussion.
It was great.
Of course, wish you the best of luck with SelfActual. I think it's really important work. So thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next time.